I was 22 years old when on a beautiful May evening, my father died of a massive heart attack. I had 4 younger siblings still at home. The youngest one was 13. My mom was 48 when my dad died, when she became a widow. She never wanted to remarry. One of us kids would ask her. She'd always say, I only loved one man. I'm not going through that dating stuff ever again. I don't want to do that. But she somehow managed to parent 4 teenagers all by herself, to work enough to feed and clothe and pay for all the bills. She became quite tough by having to do it all by herself. And then when all the kids were out of the house, then she began to minister to others who were in similar situations, helping them figure out how to handle those kind of situations where you were suddenly, unexpectedly, all alone and having to do everything by yourself. When I hear the stories today about the widows in the first reading and the second reading, I don't think of somebody who's weak. I think of somebody who's tough. Somebody who, through her suffering, has come to understand what really matters and doesn't have time for nonsense and all those other things that might happen along the way. She doesn't have time for that. The widows I've known throughout my ministry tend to be that way. They tend to be very strong, tough women. So what Jesus is doing in the gospel today is probably not doing what most of the time that gospel gets used for, because that gospel tends to get used during stewardship campaigns when it's about giving a lot of money, and that's what we tend to use it for. Or we could use it also to critique liturgical vestments, I suppose, that first part of Jesus getting on the scribe's case about wearing long vestments and having front places in the synagogue. Or Jesus is clearly critiquing them for their show and their intent, because they're just doing the religion stuff for themselves, for their own personal gain. The scene that Jesus observes in the gospel, because he sits there quietly and watches the wealthy come in. And the scripture scholars tell me, I'll trust them, that this is what took place, that there were these big metal containers that the offerings were put into, kind of like a horn of plenty, most likely made of copper or bronze, so quite large. When the wealthy would come in, they would have Roman coins, and they would have to exchange them for shekels, or the temple coin. So you could not put a Roman coin, you couldn't donate that. So the money changers did the exchanging of the money, and most likely they had servants to carry it, because they probably were in kind of big chests filled with coins for the temple. And then what they would do is they would come in to make their donation, and they would have to dump all those coins into that metal horn of plenty. So the scholars say that when the wealthy came and made a donation, it made quite a bit of noise with all these coins. It'd be like at the casino, when all the coins come pouring out and there probably wasn't flashing lights at the temple when the coins were being poured in, but everybody would be like, ooh, wow, look what he gave. Look, he gave a whole bunch. Look what she's giving. Look, oh my gosh. So everybody would have noticed. No dollar bills in those days. No checks being written, no credit cards, no PayPal. It was all this noisy gift. Jesus watches that. Then he watches this widow come forward and put in these 2 tiny coins, which probably made no sound because they were the smallest of the coins and they were paper thin. And so when she dropped them in, nobody heard that. But Jesus did. What he's praising her for is not the amount she gives, and he's not critiquing the wealthy for what they're doing. What he's praising her for is her willingness to risk and her trust that God will provide. Same as the widow in the first reading. She trusts Elijah. She takes the risk. She risks her life. She gives it all away. That's what he's praising. Look at her. Now, he doesn't change her. Jesus does not rush up and say, oh, poor thing, you're so poor, let me give you something. No. He just observes and praises her for her great courage and trust, faith. She was tough. She knew what mattered. And she was willing to take that risk to do what mattered. Now, Jesus is not just an observer on the side, not making judgment on what's happening there. Okay, wealthy, well, they didn't take any risk. They just gave from their surplus. So they really no hurt there. She's risking. It's not just an observation. Because this event takes place where? In the temple. And in Mark's gospel, Jesus is now in Jerusalem. And where he goes from here is to have the Last Supper and to be arrested and to die. This woman is a model for Jesus of somebody who is risking their life for what they care about. And Jesus is going to do the same thing in just a day or two. Now we might think, well, yeah, but Jesus always knew it was going to be all right? Jesus knew he was going to rise from the dead. Well, we don't know that. We know that Jesus feared death. We know that in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was afraid to die, and that he sweated blood out of fear. So for some reason, he was afraid. And it required on Jesus' part an act of faith in his Father. Now, there may have been some understanding, but it wasn't like he went boldly into death. No. He prayed that the cup would pass him away. But he acted anyway. He trusted God and then took the risk. And all of history was changed because of it. And we are saved because of it. Because of his gift, we are different. The gift of his life. So then, my friends, on this day, as we hear these stories about people being willing to give and to trust and to risk, probably the question for all of us is, have we ever done that? Most of the time, we give out of our extra, as Jesus is critiquing the wealthy. Very seldom do I give where I have risked something, at least when it comes to money. But it may not be just simply about a monetary gift. It might be about how you give your life. Because that is something that we're all invited to do on a regular basis, to take a risk. To risk relationship, to risk status, to risk what people think of us. To take the risk to do what is the loving thing, the honest thing, the just thing. Instead of hiding to the side and hoping somebody else does it. Maybe this week, as we contemplate the great gift that Jesus gave us, we could ask that the Holy Spirit fill us with those gifts necessary to have as much faith as the widow.